Case 1. Gas Station Rape. Twin DNA Breakthrough, Virginia, 1987. On December 19, 1987, a 50-year-old woman working the late shift at a Chevron gas station in Woodbridge, Virginia, walked into a detached restroom building and would emerge carrying a crime that baffled investigators for decades. Late on that December night, the gas station's interior was quiet. Just the attendant, alone, fulfilling a shift. She stepped outside to use the restroom facility located a short distance away, a small standalone unit set away from the main building. Shortly after she entered, an assailant forced his way in behind her. Armed with a knife, he subdued her, taped her head and hands, and warned her not to call out. After committing the assault, he fled. The victim remained inside, trapped by fear, until she could call for help. She was taken to Potomac Hospital, now Centara Northern Virginia Medical Center, where over the next day a physical evidence recovery kit, PERC, rape kit, was carefully assembled. Semen and skin swabs, along with other biological samples, were collected, sealed, and shipped to the Virginia Department of Forensic Science, DFS. A male DNA profile was generated, but it yielded no matches in state or national databases. No suspects were ever tied to that profile. The case gradually moved into cold case status, with investigative resources thinning over time and leads going inert. When Prince William County's cold case unit reopened the file in 2019, the detectives assigned already had decades of experience. Master Detective Giannina Panito, 22 years in violent crime work, and Detective Colleen Grantham, 23 years in sexual assault cases, took the reins. Together with crime scene investigator Andrea Feldman and support from DFS, they began by re-examining the original evidence chain. Their first move was to resubmit stored items, the victim's clothing, stained underwear, swabs, to DFS under modern protocols to determine whether improved extraction techniques could yield new or improved DNA signals. Simultaneously, they reviewed the original case companion files, investigative notes, interview logs, suspect lists, and archival lead reports. They re-interviewed neighbors, canvassed the area, and followed up on historically cold tips logged but never resolved. To get beyond conventional DNA, the detectives contracted with the Marshall University Forensic Science Center for genealogical DNA analysis. A small stain from the victim's underwear was extracted and run through a genealogical pipeline. In early 2022, the resulting data led to two names in Florida, John Arthur Marubio and Russell Anthony Marubio, confirmed to be identical twins. But at that point, conventional STR DNA tests could not differentiate between them. Both matched cleanly. That juncture is where the case stalled again. How to point to one twin when their genetic blueprint was effectively identical? From 1987 onward, investigators faced multiple structural and scientific obstacles. First, although the DNA profile was preserved, it was not present in CODIS or DFS databases, meaning no direct hit was ever possible. The technology of the 1980s and 1990s lacked the resolution to detect ultra-rare variants or mosaic mutations. Samples had degraded over time, quantity was limited, and in some cases contamination risk or partial allele dropout weakened data reliability. The genealogical lead, while enormously promising, came with its own barrier. Identical twins share almost all their DNA, so the match afforded no discrimination beyond one of these two. That barrier was a kind of forensic blind spot. Prosecutors had long been reluctant to embrace untested or controversial methods in court. Even if a forensic lab found something new, its admissibility was uncertain. At earlier attempts in other jurisdictions, such as Massachusetts, similar sequencing-based techniques had been rejected for lack of precedent. The fear of rejection loomed large. Investigators knew that to succeed, they had to build not only the science, but also the legal foundation. Thus, the case lay frozen, not for lack of effort, but because the tools and confidence to break the tie simply did not exist. The turning point arrived in 2022. Detectives submitted the twins' buccal swabs, obtained via court-approved warrant, and the original crime scene DNA to Parabon Nanolabs in Reston, Virginia, a company specializing in advanced forensic genomics. Parabon already had a history of combining genetic genealogy with DNA phenotyping in cold cases. Parabon scientists proposed applying ultra-deep whole genome sequencing and somatic mutation analysis, the study of genetic changes that occur post-zygote. Identical twins start with the same DNA, but as their cells divide over decades, tiny mutations, known as mosaic or somatic variants, may appear in one twin but not the other. These changes act as microsignatures. The lab compared the high-depth sequence data from the crime scene extract against both twins' buccal DNA. They found rare single nucleotide variants unique to Russell Marubio that matched the scene. Only he bore those mutations. His twin did not. These variant calls were validated across multiple replicates to ensure reliability and to rule out sequencing artifacts or noise. To get judicial traction, prosecutors prepared expert affidavits, validation studies, error rate bounds, and methodology descriptions. They demonstrated that the probability of random error was vanishingly small. The defense challenged the use of novel forensic science, questioning mutation rates, lab controls, contamination safeguards, chain of custody integrity. But the court admitted evidence anyway, noting that the science had matured and that competing labs had published supporting research. In court, expert witnesses explained that among the 3 billion base pairs, only on the order of 5 to 10 somatic variant differences might exist between twins. Yet those differences are enough when carefully filtered and confirmed. The jury was presented not just with a DNA match, but an argument that in the twin context, this method was the only path to differentiation. Additional corroboration came through timelines and circumstantial consistency. Investigators tracked the twins' address histories and found that Russell had been traveling in the mid-Atlantic region in late 1987. His twin brother's records placed him elsewhere. That alignment lent weight to the weighty molecular evidence. Once genealogy established the twin pair, obtaining buccal swabs allowed conventional STR confirmation. Both twins matched the crime scene STR profile, as expected. The mutation data was the differentiator. Russell Marubio was arrested on June 23, 2023, in Putnam County, Florida. He was released on bond pending trial over the objection of prosecutors. At trial, prosecutors introduced the somatic mutation evidence alongside standard DNA results. The defense challenged admissibility. Cross-examination focused on sequencing error rates, mosaicism variability, and potential drop-in or contamination. Prosecutors presented validation data, independent replication, and expert testimony about mutation stability. The jury was led carefully through the logic. The DNA from the crime scene, when augmented with rare mutation data, uniquely pointed to Russell and excluded his twin. On August 21, 2025, the jury found Russell Marubio guilty of the December 1987 abduction and sexual assault. At that moment, he became the first person in U.S. legal history convicted using somatic mutation evidence to distinguish between identical twins. His bond was revoked immediately. Sentencing was scheduled for November 7, 2025, in front of Judge Kimberly A. Irving. With conviction secured, the case was declared closed, convicted. The victim, now in her late 80s, attended the trial and later told reporters she was very happy with the outcome, expressing gratitude toward the detectives and the scientific community. Commonwealth's attorney Amy Ashworth, in press remarks, likened this case to past paradigm shifts in forensic science, pointing to fingerprinting or the adoption of STR-DNA assays, and said the methods that seemed unusual now may be commonplace tomorrow. The public record does not provide a definitive motive beyond opportunistic assault. There is no documented personal connection between victim and assailant. The prosecution's narrative emphasized that this was a violent, random act, and that the weight of forensic proof, not motive, secured justice. Throughout the trial and afterward, the community watched in awe of the scientific feat. Local media called it Virginia's cold case miracle. Legal scholars published commentary on the precedent, how this case now opens the door for revisiting old cases involving twins. On social media and in local forums, residents debated privacy, ethics, and the future of forensic standards. Some raised caution. If mutation-based methods become routine, Will defense teams challenge every twin-related cold case? Others celebrated that a nearly forgotten crime could be resolved after 38 years. For the victim and her family, decades of uncertainty gave way to formal closure. In court, she testified with dignity and restraint. The final verdict mattered not only legally, but symbolically. Authority had recognized her suffering and refused to let time erase responsibility. Thank you for still watching this video. Pause for just a second and subscribe to this channel. By the way, we will love to know where you are watching us from. Let's know in the comments section. Now let's continue. Case 2. Murder, arrest via DNA in 2025, Iowa 1983. On a frozen December day in 1983 in rural Walker, Iowa, 24-year-old Ronald Lee Novak was found slain in his home. Decades passed without resolution until May 2025. Shortly before Christmas 1983, Novak's body was discovered in an unheated room of his residence, found by a friend who had come by to check on him. His hands were bound behind his back, his face and head bore signs of blunt trauma, and he suffered a gunshot wound to the chest. The medical examiner determined that the combination of injuries, shock, and hypothermia caused his death. The scene suggested burglary or robbery as a possible motive, but nothing definitive. Investigators collected physical evidence: Novak's clothing, swabs, and a hammer, believed to have been used in the attack. Initially, forensic capacity was limited. The swabs and clothes yielded only partial traces, not strong enough to point to a suspect. Because the perpetrator's DNA was not in state or federal databases, there was no match. Over years, staffing, shifting priorities, and the sheer age of the case gradually pushed it into cold case status. As decades passed, technology advanced, but this case remained out of reach. DNA methods available in the 1990s, RFLP, early STR, lacked sensitivity for severely degraded or mixed samples. Some of the evidence was compromised by age, and portions may have been lost or damaged. Because the suspect was not entered into any database, the standard path for matching was closed. Investigative leads grew stale. Persons of interest died or relocated. Memories dimmed. Resource limitations constricted retesting opportunities. In sum, the case lay dormant, suspended in a forensic purgatory. In the early 2020s, a renewed effort began. The Lynn County Sheriff's Office collaborated with the Lynn County Attorney's Office, with support from the FBI and external labs. In May 2025, they announced the arrest of Michael S. Shepard, 64, of Fairview, Oregon, for the December 1983 murder of Novak. The pathway to Shepard's arrest hinged on re-examining archived evidence with modern DNA techniques and genealogical methods. Investigators submitted swatches from Novak's clothing and the hammer recovered in 1983 to DNA Labs International for high-sensitivity testing. Parabon Nanolabs provided genetic genealogy support to link unknown DNA to family lines. The genealogical pipeline narrowed the field to 3 brothers. From there, further targeted testing isolated Shepard as the likely source. Matching of the DNA through STR comparison and possibly mixture deconvolution by probabilistic genotyping provided corroborating evidence. In a cooperative operation, deputies from Lynn County, Oregon, and the FBI executed the arrest on May 28, 2025. Shepard was charged with first-degree murder under Iowa Code, Section 707(1), 707.2(1), A, or B, 703.1, a Class A felony. He is held in the Multnomah County, Oregon jail pending extradition to Lynn County. Officials believe that Shepard, possibly with others, entered Novak's home intending to steal money or marijuana. No public report indicates a co-defendant has yet been arrested. As of 2025, Shepard's case remains in its early legal phases. No conviction has been recorded publicly. Motive is alleged in press statements: robbery and possibly marijuana theft. Investigators believe he traveled to Novak's home with intent to rob, and his DNA wound up on the hammer and the victim's clothes. The case is active and pending trial or extradition proceedings. The family of Ronald Novak has waited more than 40 years for this moment. At the press conference, his sister Patty Wilson said, "You start to give up hope that there will be an answer. we look forward to the trial. Sheriff Brian Gardner spoke to the burdens of time and memory. We recognize the pain, endured for more than 40 years. Local reaction in rural Iowa was a mix of relief and wariness. Some expressed renewed confidence that cold case science is not an academic dream, but a real tool for justice. Rural communities, long skeptical of under-resourced law enforcement, hailed it as a beacon of hope. Law enforcement agencies took pains to credit all prior investigators. The Lynn County press release explicitly acknowledged the original deputies, the preservation of evidence in 1983, and the role that proper collection played decades later. Case 3, Yogurt Shop Murders, Exoneration and New ID, Texas, 1991. On December 6, 1991, in Austin, Texas, 4 teenage girls, Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers, were found bound, shot, and left in a burning yogurt shop. Decades of false leads, convictions, and exonerations followed. In 2025, a new suspect's name came up that December night as the I Can't Believe It's Yogurt. Shop on West Anderson Lane closed up. The 4 girls, 2 employees, 2 patrons, were inside. Moments later, a fire was reported. Firefighters discovered burned interior, shattered glass, and, tragically, the bodies of the girls nude, gagged, tied with their own underwear, and each shot in the head. Evidence suggested at least one victim had been sexually assaulted. Early investigators faced a tremendous hurdle. The blaze and fire suppression efforts consumed and damaged much of the biological and physical evidence. The fire's heat, water from sprinklers, and subsequent cleanup degraded the crime scene. Nonetheless, crime scene investigators recovered a few crucial items: shell casings, one found in a drain, fingernail scrapings, clothing swabs, and fragments of trace DNA. At first, the Austin Police Department Homicide Unit, in partnership with the Travis County District Attorney's Office, cast a wide net, interviewing neighbors, following tips, exploring leads. Over time, thousands of tips and numerous confessions poured in. In 1999, a yogurt shop task force re-reviewed the case. 4 suspects, Maurice Pierce, Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, and Forrest Wellborn, were arrested for capital murder. Springsteen and Scott confessed, each implicating the other, and were convicted. Pierce and Wellborn were either no-billed or released for lack of evidence. However, over time, both convictions were overturned. DNA reanalysis showed none of the original suspects matched the crime scene DNA, including newly extracted YSTR profiles. In 2009, charges against Springsteen and Scott were dropped. From then until 2025, the case remained alive but cold. Investigators monitored any technological advances, held the evidence, solicited new tips, but lacked the forensic leverage to tie any new name to the scene. Many believed it might never be solved. In 2022, Austin PD assigned Detective Daniel Jackson to revive the investigation. He began methodically re-examining the shell casing from the drain, asking whether it had ever been entered into the NIBIN, National Integrated Ballistic Information Network System. It had not. Jackson submitted it, and months later, it produced a hit. The same firearm was linked to a 1998 cold case in Kentucky. That ballistic link opened the door for cross-jurisdiction collaboration. Investigators reached out to laboratories conducting YSTR analyses, male lineage markers. They manually searched their YSTR databases for a match to the previously derived unknown male profile from fingernail scrapings and vaginal swabs. Only the South Carolina State Crime Lab responded with a complete 27-marker YSTR match to an historic profile from 1990. That profile belonged to Robert Eugene Brashers. At the same time, investigators revisited the fingernail DNA from victim Amy Ayers and compared it directly to Brasher's reference profile. The match was reported as compelling, with odds quoted, on official statements, of 2.5 million to 1 in favor of Brasher's. Because Brasher's died by suicide during a police standoff in Missouri in 1999, no live arrest was possible. His exhumed remains were used to confirm the DNA match. Combined ballistic evidence, YSTR match, and circumstantial alignment forged the chain of reasoning. Brasher's, long deceased, was the sole plausible match for the genetic and ballistic signatures left in Austin. In a press release, the Austin Police Department labeled this a significant breakthrough in the 1991 murders. Among the statement's claims, through a wide range of DNA testing, Robert Eugene Brasher's has been identified as the suspect. Springsteen and Scott, the two men once convicted, are now formally cleared. Their convictions were vacated, and no physical evidence ever linked them to the crime. They spent years behind bars based on confessions that later were considered coerced. With Brasher's as the named suspect, the case is considered closed, suspect deceased, though investigation remains open to finalize any additional corroboration. No new arrests can be made, but the naming offers symbolic justice and revision of the historical record. Motive is not conclusively documented. Investigators suggest robbery was a cover. They believe the assailant may have acted with violent intent beyond mere theft. Brasher's had prior convictions for violent crime, including homicide, rape, and impersonating law enforcement, across multiple states: Missouri, South Carolina, Tennessee. The Harbison, Thomas, and Ayers families have lived under the weight of uncertainty for more than 3 decades. At a press conference announcing the breakthrough, Barbara Wilson, mother of Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, said, "All we ever wanted was truth. We never wanted anyone imprisoned for something they didn't do." The families expressed a mix of relief and grief. Relief that a direction now exists. Grief that the perpetrator will never stand trial. Sonora Thomas, sister of Eliza, said her heart hung in limbo for years, that now a name hangs there not as closure, but as a point to which memory can return. Public reaction was swift. Local media stressed not only a solved mystery, but a cautionary tale: the importance of preserving evidence, investing in cold case units, and updating forensic infrastructure. Some voices, particularly in legal commentary, questioned over-reliance on YSTR, since it is lineage-based and does not exclusively single out an individual, and emphasized the need for full corroboration before declaring final closure. Austin's chief of police, Lisa Davis, honored the perseverance of prior investigators. She pledged to continue exploring connections between Brasher's and other unsolved crimes. Case 4. Mother Murder. Cold case solved in 2025, Indiana 1972. On July 7, 1972, 26-year-old mother Phyllis Baylor vanished on a trip from Indianapolis to visit her parents, with her 3-year-old daughter in the car. The next morning, her car was discovered abandoned. That evening, Baylor and her young child were en route to Bluffton, Indiana. When she failed to arrive, her family reported her missing. The following morning, her car was found in Grant County, hood up and abandoned. Approximately an hour later, a passerby discovered Baylor and her daughter in a ditch in Allen County. The daughter emerged unhurt. Baylor had been shot to death and sexually assaulted. Autopsy results affirmed those findings. In 1972, DNA testing was non-existent. Investigators relied on conventional tools: fingerprints, interviews, suspect alibis, crime scene reconstruction. No conclusive lead emerged. Over the years, limited forensic enhancements were applied. Authorities developed a partial DNA profile from her clothing, date unspecified, which was used at times to eliminate persons of interest. Despite those efforts, nothing solidified. The partial profile was weak. Many possible matches remained indistinguishable in the region. Budget constraints, shifting priorities, and limited genealogy infrastructure slowed any attempt to push beyond elimination. Agencies archived evidence, kept open files, and waited for the day technology might leap forward. In 2024, Indiana State Police's cold case team succeeded in deriving a much stronger DNA profile from the preserved clothing evidence. That improved profile, rendered by advanced next-generation sequencing, MPS, NGS, provided far greater resolution than the earlier partial version. Investigators forwarded that enhanced profile to Identifiers International, a forensic genealogy firm based in California. Working in collaboration, genealogists mapped distant genetic relatives and traced a pedigree that pointed toward Fred Allen Lieneman, who, at the time of the murder, would have been about 25 years old. Lieneman had since been murdered in Detroit in 1985, making live prosecution impossible. Investigative teams cross-checked Lienemann's known address histories, travel records, and criminal record. Lienemann had a documented long criminal history, including a first-degree murder charge in May 1985. While no known prior connection between him and Baylor existed, the genetic match on the improved profile made him the only person consistent across the genealogical, temporal, and forensic vectors. Because Lienemann was deceased, authorities could not collect a new buccal swab. But the genealogical and DNA match, along with the strengthened profile, met the standard for identification. Indiana State Police publicly stated that, if alive, Lienemann would now be charged. As is, the case is considered solved by identification. This case is now closed. No prosecution. Suspect deceased. With Lienemann as the identified suspect, the investigative record is updated. Motive remains speculative. Public reporting has not disclosed credible evidence of motive beyond the fact that Lienemann was not previously connected to Baylor in her life. The implication is that the crime was opportunistic, possibly exploitative, but that remains conjecture. For Phyllis Baylor's descendants, this identification broke decades of silence. The Indiana State Police, in a public release, called the outcome a victory for persistence. Sergeant Wes Rolander, public affairs officer, noted, "After years of questions, this family finally has answers about what happened to her." Local media in Allen County revived interest in the case, revisiting old interviews, updating community memory, and spotlighting the value of preserving evidence. It also generated commentary on cold case funding and the expanding promise of genetic genealogy for rural jurisdictions that historically lacked forensic resources. Thank you for standing with us on this journey. Every view, comment, and share helps us honor victims and keep their voices alive. If you'd like to support even more, consider joining our YouTube membership. You'll get exclusive perks, access to premium content, and, most importantly, you'll help us keep telling stories that should never be forgotten. Case 5. Murder and Sexual Assault. Othram Assisted. Shasta County, 1984. Shasta County, California. 1984. A woman's life is taken in a violent assault that leaves behind shock, silence, and a trail of biological evidence no one could yet decipher. For decades, the file sat cold. But in 2025, with the help of cutting-edge sequencing by Othram, that silence finally cracked. A suspect emerged. It began with a brutal crime. In 1984, a woman was found sexually assaulted and murdered in a remote section of Shasta County. Her injuries were violent, the scene chaotic. Investigators collected what they could: blood traces, fibers, biological fluids, fragments of a story no one could yet piece together. There were no witnesses, no confession, and no physical description of a suspect. Local investigators canvassed neighborhoods, interviewed anyone nearby, and built out a long list of possible names. But in the end, the case collapsed under the weight of its own limitations. No fingerprints matched, no DNA system existed to run comparisons. With no suspect and no viable leads, the case slowly went quiet. By the 1990s, it was formally cold. The original evidence had one lifeline: DNA. But it was fragile, degraded, possibly a mixture. Local laboratories lacked the technology to extract anything meaningful from such compromised samples, and the resources to outsource testing? Not there. For years, the case sat idle, just another tab in a dusty cold case binder. That changed in 2025. Shasta County Sheriff's Office submitted the old evidence to Othram, a forensic DNA lab in Texas known for solving long-dormant cases. There, forensic scientists applied forensic-grade genome sequencing, FGGS, a method designed to pull viable genetic profiles from low-quantity, degraded material. Using that enhanced profile, genealogists entered the unknown DNA into specialized databases. Distant relatives popped up. Then came the mapping. Family trees built from third and fourth cousins, cross-referenced with age, geography, and historical movement. One person rose to the top. Investigators quietly obtained a reference DNA sample, most likely via a warrant, a trash pull, or direct buccal swab. STR and SNP testing confirmed what they suspected: a match. As of now, the suspect's name has not been released publicly, but the DNA is strong. The statistical likelihood ratio supports prosecution. If the suspect is alive, charges will follow. No arrest has been publicly disclosed, but reports confirm the case is officially reopened. Investigators say they've identified the person responsible. The motive behind the crime has not been shared. Given the nature of the case, it may have been opportunistic, a random act of sexual violence, or tied to someone with prior offenses. That part remains under wraps. What's clear is that Shasta County now holds answers it never expected to get. After over 40 years of waiting, the victim's family, still living in the region, was notified of the breakthrough. Though no full resolution has been announced, officials called the moment a major forensic milestone for rural Northern California. Local media described it as a 30-year-old cold case revived, igniting public debate over how many more such cases still lie buried in filing cabinets across the country. This wasn't just a triumph of science. It was a message to families who'd lost hope, that even after 4 decades, their stories weren't forgotten. Case 6. British citizen John Doe, Maricopa County, USA, IgG identification. In 2013, the remains of an unidentified man were found in the unforgiving desert heat of Maricopa County, Arizona. No ID, no wallet, no trail. He became just another John Doe. But in 2025, thanks to investigative genetic genealogy, IgG, researchers traced his DNA across continents to a small town in Britain. The dead had a name, and someone 5,000 miles away finally had an answer. The discovery was quiet, almost routine. In the summer of 2013, a passerby reported what they thought were animal bones off a remote service road near the outskirts of Phoenix. What they found instead was a man, or what was left of one. The remains were skeletal but relatively intact. There were no personal belongings, no phone, no identification, and no obvious signs of trauma. The desert had done what deserts do, erased nearly everything. He was entered into the system as Maricopa County John Doe, male, Caucasian features, estimated age, mid-30s to 50s. His body was transported to the Maricopa County Medical Examiner's Office, MCOM, where pathologists began their work. Early efforts included isotopic analysis to determine geographic movement, dental record submissions, and cross-checks with national databases like NAMUS. Nothing clicked. There were no matches in U.S. missing persons systems. His face, reconstructed digitally, yielded no identification from the public. No one came forward. As years passed, his file was reviewed but not resolved. There were no clear signs of foul play, but the absence of identification kept the possibility of a crime on the table. All authorities could do was wait for technology or circumstance to catch up. Cold years and breakthrough combined. The case could have ended there, another cold file, another name never spoken again. But across the Atlantic, in Sheffield Hallam University's forensic lab, an idea was forming. The team, partnered with researchers from Ramapo College of New Jersey, began exploring the idea of cross-border investigative genealogy, the use of US and UK DNA databases to solve international cold cases. The question was, what if the John Doe in Maricopa wasn't American at all? In 2024, MCOM submitted a preserved DNA sample to the UK team. The sample had been degraded but still held enough integrity for SNP-based testing. Using autosomal SNP matching, genealogists began comparing the sample against open-source international databases. Months passed with nothing significant. Then, in May 2025, a crucial lead emerged. 2 first cousins once removed in the UK agreed to provide reference DNA. The match was strong. Through triangulated data and genealogical tree mapping, the researchers confirmed that the unidentified man found in Arizona in 2013 was a British citizen named Michael Hill. He had no U.S. criminal history, no international warrants. In fact, there was no missing persons report ever filed in his name, neither in the U.S. nor the U.K. Hill had apparently traveled to the U.S. quietly, possibly undocumented or via informal routes, and never returned. His family believed he had simply gone abroad and lost contact, maybe by choice. It wasn't until authorities knocked on their door in the UK with a DNA confirmation that they learned the truth. The identification was verified through vital records, passport issuance archives, and family tree documentation. No signs pointed definitively toward homicide, but the mystery deepened. What was Hill doing in Arizona? Why did he never contact home? What caused his death? Where it stands now. The case is now closed as a John Doe identification, but not closed in every sense. The medical examiner's office has ruled the cause of death undetermined. There were no skeletal fractures, no ballistic trauma, no obvious foul play. But that doesn't rule out crime. Dehydration? Suicide? Homicide disguised by time and elements? It remains uncertain. Law enforcement hasn't made any arrests because to this point, there's no suspect, and not even a crime formally identified. But with a name now attached to the bones, a trail can be followed. Officials haven't ruled out the possibility of reopening the case if new evidence arises. The Maricopa County Sheriff's Office now holds a file labeled Michael Hill British National, no longer just a faceless victim. The family and community response in the UK. Hill's extended family expressed a complicated form of relief. After 12 years of silence, the not knowing had taken root. The identification didn't bring answers, but it closed the loudest question. Where is he? According to Sheffield Hallam University, the family thanked the researchers quietly, choosing privacy over publicity. But the professional community wasn't quiet. The collaboration between Maricopa authorities, Sheffield Hallam, and Ramapo College was hailed as one of the first documented British-American John Doe resolutions through IGG. Experts emphasized how critical international collaboration will become in future cold cases. It also revived conversations about the legal gray zones of cross-border DNA usage. Privacy, consent, and database access rules differ drastically between the US and UK. Back in Arizona, the public barely noticed. The story ran in some local papers, mostly under forensic science headlines. But for those in the cold case unit, it was a validation. The needle in the haystack can be found. Sometimes the haystack just happens to be in another country. Final notes. As of fall 2025, no criminal proceeding is underway. But with a confirmed name, the case has shifted from anonymous tragedy to personal mystery. Michael Hill was someone, a son, a cousin, a traveler who never made it back. Whether crime or accident, his story isn't over, because now it's being told. Case 7, Murder of Karen Tate, 1979, Australia. Karen Mary. Tate, 22, vanished after a night out in Perth's coastal suburbs. Her body, later found in dense bushland near Carrigullen, lay hidden for decades. In June 2025, WA police publicly named Terrence John Fisher, who died in 2000, as the suspect, after investigators connected a long-preserved male DNA profile to his descendants. It's called the force's most significant cold case breakthrough in half a century. Karen's last verified sighting was at about 11 a.m. on December 29, 1979, in Mount Lawley. She had spent the night in Cottesloe and Swanbourne with friends. Her plan was to return home. The next morning, forestry workers found remains roughly 800 meters south of Brookton Highway, within the Canning Dam catchment area, adjacent to bushland tracks. Investigators recovered a male DNA profile at the scene, believed to be that of her killer. That profile was carefully preserved in WA Police's archives. From day one, WA Police cold case investigations detectives handled the file. They deployed teams to canvass the bushland, interview anyone who had been in the area, collect all possible physical evidence, swabs, clothing, soil, hairs, and coordinate pathology and autopsy reports. Despite repeated appeals, tip lines, and public announcements, no suspect was ever firmly tied to the DNA. Over time, the case became one of the state's most infamous unsolved crimes. For decades, that male DNA sat untouched in the archives, classified unknown offender, no match in local or national databases. Genealogical tools had not matured. Legal frameworks for using them were restrictive. Investigators revisited the case occasionally, but funds, staffing, and priorities leaned toward more recent cases. Leads that once flickered, persons of interest, vague tip-offs, faded. The silence stretched. Then, in 2025, a new path emerged. WA police transferred the preserved DNA profile to their investigative genetic genealogy unit. They uploaded it into public genealogy databases, GEDmatch, Family Tree DNA, identifying multiple distant relatives. Through painstaking genealogical mapping, spanning more than 10,000 individuals, the investigators narrowed the candidate pool. That process led to Terrence John Fisher, deceased since 2000. Next, detectives charted Fisher's biography. Residences in Rivervale and Manning. Service in the Army. Carpentry work. Membership at the Fremantle Sailing Club. Access to rural sites. They executed a warrant to search Fisher's former property in Manning, using excavation equipment. In their public announcement, WA police declared Fisher as a suspect whose DNA matches the crime scene profile. Acting Assistant Commissioner Paul Coombs commented, "The breakthrough sends a very clear message. The Western Australia Police Force never gives up." Because Fisher died in 2000, no arrest or criminal prosecution is possible. The case remains open, suspect identified. Investigators are now exploring whether Fisher could be linked to two other Perth-era unsolved cases, Barbara Ann Western, 1986, and Carrie Suzanne Turner, 1991, both with disposal sites near Tate's. Motive is not publicly confirmed. Police are reconstructing Fisher's routine, patterns, and movements in the period surrounding Tate's killing. The public has been called upon to share any knowledge, no matter how small, about Fisher's life, interactions, or odd behaviors around that time. When authorities informed Tate's family, the reaction was a mixture of gratitude and anguish. They welcomed a name, but lamented that the possibility of hearing Fisher answer questions in court was lost to time. Acting Senior Sergeant Dion Selby, leading the investigation, expressed that investigators are building a clearer picture of Fisher's life, where he traveled, what he did in the weeks before and after December 1979. WA media labeled this outcome WA's biggest cold case breakthrough in decades. Analysts comment that the Tate case epitomizes how genealogy, once marginal, is now central to cracking long-frozen files. Public appeals remain active. Posters have been updated, Crime Stoppers lines reactivated, and offers of confidentiality extended to those who might have known Fisher decades ago. Case 8, Louisa Dunn, 1967. Murder and rape, oldest UK cold case conviction, Bristol, England. A quiet residential lane. The year, 1967. It was the beginning of summer, but for 75-year-old Louisa Dunn, those last days of June would mark the final moments of her life, and the start of a mystery that would stretch across nearly 6 decades. It was a Wednesday morning, June 28th. A concerned neighbor approached the doorstep of Louisa's terraced home. For 2 days, the curtains hadn't moved. The lights hadn't come on. No one had seen Louisa run her usual errands. Then came the scream. Someone had reported hearing it late in the night 2 evenings prior, but no one could identify where it had come from. Now, the silence was unbearable. Inside, the discovery was chilling. Louisa was found lying dead in her front room, strangled, brutally raped. The crime scene showed signs of forced entry, a window partially ajar. And nearby, investigators recovered a single palm print and disturbing biological evidence. Semen stains on her clothing. There was no sign of a struggle, no defensive wounds, just quiet, lethal violence. The case stunned Bristol. Louisa was no recluse. She was known in the neighborhood as a kind woman, still active for her age. She'd never married, had no children, and lived alone. An easy target, perhaps. But no one could imagine who would do such a thing, or why. From the start, the investigation faced an uphill battle. It was the 1960s, decades before the advent of DNA profiling. Forensic evidence, though collected with care, had limited value. Avon and Somerset police took the lead. Officers canvassed every home on the block, questioned dozens of men in the surrounding area, and manually compared the palm print found on the window frame against thousands of inked cards in local police files. But nothing matched. The palm print offered no leads. The semen stain was tested for blood group typing, an archaic method that could at best eliminate suspects, not identify them. The crime appeared random, opportunistic. There was no known enemy in Louisa's life, and without eyewitnesses or a clear suspect, the case began to fade. Still, investigators preserved everything: her skirt, the swabs, the clothing, the case file. Every box went into long-term storage, carefully cataloged. Even the window pane was removed and archived. Forensic hope frozen in time. Years passed, then decades. For the Dunn family, the pain lingered in silence. Without children of her own, Louisa's siblings and distant relatives carried the trauma quietly. Over time, her name was known only to a few detectives who would occasionally glance at the file in the cold case room. Labeled simply, Louisa Dunn, Homicide, 28th June 1967. But the world outside was changing. Forensic science was accelerating. And the 1980s, DNA fingerprinting arrived. But the technique required large, fresh samples. In the 1990s, newer methods emerged, but only well-funded labs could perform them. In the 2000s, the UK began building a national DNA database, but it was far from complete, and budget cuts soon crippled cold case funding. For Louisa, justice seemed as remote as ever. Then came the 2020s. In 2022, a small unit within Avon and Somerset Police began reviewing dormant cases with biological evidence. The Louisa Dunn file caught their attention. Her clothing, including the original skirt containing the semen stain, had been well preserved. A forensic team resubmitted the fabric to the Forensic Science Service using modern STR, short tandem repeat analysis combined with probabilistic genotyping. This time they got a hit. The DNA extracted from Louisa's skirt, despite being more than 50 years old, was clear enough to run through the national database. And that's where the name appeared. 92 years old, living quietly in Ipswich, no criminal record for violent crime. But in 2012, his DNA had been collected during a minor police matter, non-violent and unconnected, and that sample was still in the system. The match was undeniable. The probability of the semen belonging to anyone other than Headley was less than 1 in a billion, and there was more. The palm print, stored since 1967 and digitized in the 1990s, was now entered into AFIS, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System. It matched Headley's prints perfectly. Investigators went cold when the pieces clicked into place. Ryland Headley had been 34 at the time of the murder, a factory worker. No fixed connection to Louisa, but he had once lived in the same city. Historical employment records showed he was in Bristol the week of the crime. Detectives quietly built their case. They obtained a new warrant and traveled to Ipswich. Headley, now frail, was arrested in his home in November 2024. His neighbors were shocked, describing him as a quiet old man who kept to himself. But inside his past was something darker, something buried by time. Under questioning, Headley denied ever knowing Louisa Dunn. He claimed he had never been to her home. But when presented with the DNA and palm print evidence, he offered no alternative explanation. He refused to answer further questions. Crown prosecutors reviewed the evidence. It was strong enough to file formal charges of rape and murder, despite the 57-year gap. The trial began in mid-2025. It drew national attention. The media labeled it the oldest cold case conviction in British history. Courtrooms were packed. Reporters from across the country gathered to witness the proceedings. Headley appeared in court using a mobility aid. At times he struggled to stay awake. His defense team argued that the passage of time had made a fair trial impossible. They claimed the evidence was degraded, that witnesses were dead. That memory was unreliable, that justice delayed had become justice denied. But the Crown pressed forward. Forensic scientists explained the power of modern DNA techniques. Experts confirmed the palm print match. Prosecutors laid out Headley's presence in Bristol in 1967, highlighting the lack of any alternative explanation for his DNA inside Louisa's home, on her body, and on the window pane through which he likely entered. There were no eyewitnesses, no confession, but the science was damning. Narrator. On 30th of June 2025, the jury returned its verdict, guilty of both rape and murder. Ryland Headley was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 20 years. At 92 years old, it meant he would never leave custody again. He would die behind bars. The courtroom remained silent as the sentence was read. A few seats back, Louisa's surviving family members sat in quiet reflection. Her grandniece, Mary Dainton, spoke to reporters afterward. "We thought this day would never come. Most of us didn't even know Louisa in life, but her death haunted our family for generations. To finally have a name, to know he was alive all these years while we were still waiting, it brings closure and pain." The case sparked nationwide debate. Was justice still justice if it came nearly 60 years too late? Could someone truly stand trial for a crime committed before most of the jury had even been born? Legal analysts called the verdict a landmark. Professor Angela Gallup, one of the UK's leading forensic experts, hailed the conviction but issued a warning. These successes are becoming rare. Forensic capacity in the UK is shrinking. Cold case funding has dried up. We're losing the infrastructure to do this again. Without investment, Louisa's case might be one of the last of its kind. Police echoed the concern. The palm print, preserved so long, had nearly been discarded in a 1990s archive cleanup. The DNA swab had barely survived chain of custody issues over 5 decades. The only reason the case succeeded was because a few individuals insisted on preserving everything, believing that one day technology would catch up with the truth. And it did. Louisa Dunn's story is no longer a cold case. Her name, once buried in forgotten files, now stands as a symbol of forensic perseverance, and as a reminder that time may conceal a crime, but it cannot erase its trace. Case 9. Catherine Daviau, 2008, Montreal, Canada. Genealogy identifies deceased suspect. In the early December of 2008, in Montreal's Rosemont-le-Petit-Patrie borough, a young woman's life ended in violence. Her name was Catherine Daviau, 26 years old, quietly living in an apartment she called home. On December 11th, police responded to a call and discovered her body. She had been stabbed multiple times and, in what would prove to be a cruel afterthought, parts of her apartment had been set alight. The fire, investigators would later surmise, was intended to conceal evidence. But beneath scorched surfaces and heavy smoke, a whisper of truth remained. Preserved DNA, waiting decades to speak. From the outset, the Montreal Police, SPVM, treated it as homicide. Inside the crime scene, despite extensive damage, biological samples survived. Investigators gathered swabs, slides, debris, and charred remnants, recording chain of custody carefully. The fire complicated analysis. Heat, smoke, and contamination threatened to erase what little could serve as a clue. Yet the original forensic team treated even partial fragments as precious, knowing that science might one day catch up. In the days that followed, officers canvassed neighbors, lifted fingerprints, and sought witnesses. No one saw an intruder. The entry point remained uncertain. In the early hours of the morning, the neighborhood was quiet. Years later, archival records would show that Daviau had posted a classified advertisement offering her car for sale. A response to that ad became an early lead, but in 2008 it yielded nothing concrete. As weeks passed, leads dwindled. DNA profiles derived from the scene did not match anything in provincial or national databases. Erosion, fire damage, and low-quality fragments frustrated every advanced test repeatedly applied. The case stored itself in cold case files. For years, investigators glanced back, but nothing broke open. Montreal advanced. Technology progressed, forensic labs improved, but Daviau's files remained static. In 2025, SPVM spearheaded a new push. The Forensic Lab, LSJML, Laboratoire de Sciences Judiciaires et de Médecine Légale, re-examined the preserved DNA. Using probabilistic genotyping and improved extraction methods, they extracted a genetic signal from fragments once deemed too degraded for use. A genealogical pipeline was engaged. Public and private genealogy databases accepted the refined profile, and family tree research began. DNA matches to distant relatives emerged. Meticulous elimination narrowed the field until the name Jacques Bolduc stood unmistakably above all others. Bolduc had died in 2021 while in custody at the Archival institution, serving time for 2 armed robberies and attempted murders. City News Montreal. Authorities confirmed that his stored prison DNA matched the crime scene DNA with high confidence, not a familial match, but identical. Because Bolduc was deceased, no arrest could ever be made. In a 2025 press announcement, SPVM affirmed the case now stands solved via identification. City News Montreal. Commander Melanie Dupont described the breakthrough as a triumph over time, labeling it the moment the victim finally speaks. The lab director, Suzanne Marchand, echoed the sentiment. Preserved evidence, paired with innovative methods, had broken decades of silence. With identification secured, the case is formally closed. There will be no trial, no conviction, no sentencing. For Catherine's loved ones, the closure is bittersweet, knowing who was responsible, but never seeing them answer in court. The lead from the classified ad has taken on new weight. Police believe Bolduc responded, establishing contact and providing a foothold to enter her life. That pathway likely explains how he accessed the apartment without suspicion. Investigators have noted Bolduc's pattern of violence and his recent absence from his halfway residence on the day of the murder as possible markers of intent. The fire was not random. It was calculated. The act of setting flame to her apartment suggests forethought, a desire to erase traces. And yet, even in that destruction, DNA remained. Against all odds, that remnant spoke his name. During the public announcement, SPVM emphasized how many lives were bound to Catherine's memory. Officers, lab scientists, genealogists, and most of all her family, who waited in uncertainty for nearly 17 years. The revelation garnered national attention. Media outlets called it proof that no crime is truly forgotten. Skeptics noted that identification cannot deliver full justice. But in Canada's cold case community, the Davao case is now emblematic of the frontier of forensic possibility. While the community and press applauded, the family's reaction was quieter, more complicated. Their relief mingled with sorrow. Relief that a name exists. Sorrow that justice would never arrive in a courtroom. The echo of unanswered questions still remains. Did Catherine know Bolduc before they met? Was the meeting consensual or planned? Did the fire conceal more than forensic traces? These remain unanswered. But now, at least, Catherine's story has a name attached. In a way, her silence has been answered. Case 10, Peter Sullivan, UK, exoneration. After 38 years, wrongful conviction overturned. He had spent most of his adult life behind bars, labeled the Beast of Birkenhead, a frightening moniker born of the horrific crime for which he was convicted. But in May 2025, nearly 4 decades later, he walked free, not as a hero, but as a man whose innocence was finally acknowledged. His name is Peter Sullivan, once convicted of murdering 21-year-old Diane Sindall in August 1986, now exonerated after new DNA tests proved he could not have been the perpetrator. The night Diane died was unremarkable until it erupted into tragedy. She had worked late at the Wellington pub in Bebington and was making her way home in her small blue van when it sputtered and died on Borough Road, Birkenhead. Forced to walk, she vanished into darkness. Witnesses later told police they heard angry murmuring, possibly a struggle, between midnight and 2 a.m. Her body was discovered in an alleyway off Borough Road in the early morning of August 2nd, partially clothed, brutally beaten, and sexually assaulted. Her skull was fractured, her face mutilated. A pathologist would later say her injuries were among the worst seen outside a high-impact collision. Merseyside police launched a sweeping effort. Hundreds of interviews, door-to-door inquiries, and forensic examinations followed. But the turning point came when they arrested Sullivan in September 1986. His arrest was based largely on inconsistent statements about his whereabouts and a confession given before legal representation. In the early interviews, police did not provide him any solicitor or appropriate adult, despite his youth and known cognitive vulnerabilities. Those omissions would later be deemed profoundly unfair. Sullivan's interrogation history is troubled. At first, he denied any involvement. Then, under sustained pressure, he broke in tears and admitted involvement, only to retract it later, once legal counsel was engaged. Many who later reviewed the case described his psychological profile as highly suggestible and lacking capacity for nuanced expression, factors that rendered him extraordinarily vulnerable to coercive questioning. At trial in 1987, the Crown presented 3 strands of evidence. The first, Sullivan's own taped admissions, despite their inconsistencies. The second, forensic evidence including bite mark analysis, asserting that dental impressions matched wounds on Diane's body. And third, circumstantial elements, his presence in the general area, behavior that night, and alleged purchase of petrol hours before. The jury accepted the case. Sullivan was convicted and handed life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years. Over the next decades, Sullivan never admitted guilt. His appeals failed again and again. In 2008, he applied to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, CCRC, challenging both the bite mark evidence and the fairness of his police interrogations. But at that time, experts from the now-defunct Forensic Science Service advised that new DNA profiling was highly unlikely to produce a usable profile. The CCRC declined to refer the case back to the Court of Appeal. In 2019, Sullivan tried to appeal directly, bypassing the CCRC, but that attempt was rejected in 2021. Judges held that the bite mark evidence was not central enough to overturn the conviction. The path remained blocked. Yet Sullivan and his legal team persisted, testing the boundaries of new science, new advocacy, and renewed review. In 2021, Sullivan again applied to CCRC, raising fresh concerns about interview practices, forensic methodology, and the original murder weapon. The commission reopened the case and pursued modern DNA retesting. Using archived biological samples, despite their age, degradation, and the environmental stresses of nearly 40 years, laboratory scientists extracted a DNA signal from semen preserved in Diane's body. That profile did not match Sullivan. The CCRC made the decision: push the case back to the Court of Appeal. Court proceedings commenced. On 13th of May 2025, the Court of Appeal quashed Sullivan's conviction, declaring it unsafe. Lord Justice Holroyd, seated with Justices Goss and Bryan, observed that the strength of the old circumstantial evidence could not withstand the exclusionary power of modern DNA. Sullivan watched from HMP Wakefield via video link as the court reversed what had stood for 38 years. Tears fell. He bowed his head. For a moment, the man once branded a monster was granted relief. Outside court, his sister Kim Smith said, "We lost Peter for 39 years. We got him back today, but neither we nor Diane's family truly win." Sullivan's counsel read a statement. "I am not angry. I am not bitter." He spoke quietly, acknowledging the cruelty of losing so many years, the decay of youth into aged captivity. But he also expressed hope that Diane's family might at last find peace. Merseyside police issued a statement confirming his release. The force declared it had reopened the investigation into Diane's murder in 2023, following notification from the CCRC that the DNA analysis excluded Sullivan and pointed to an unknown male. Merseyside police. They pledged to continue forensic work, screen further DNA candidates, and appeal to the public for help. To date, they say, over 260 men have been screened and eliminated. No match has yet been found. Legal and academic observers reacted sharply. Much of modern forensic science now discredits bite mark matching as unreliable. Experts argued that Sullivan's conviction, built on shaky confessions and questionable science, was symptomatic of systemic overconfidence in unvalidated methods. The case has reignited calls for reform, mandatory recording of interrogations, stronger safeguards for vulnerable suspects, better archiving of biological material, and proactive review of other possible wrongful convictions. The CCRC, in its statement, acknowledged it regretted not identifying the miscarriage earlier. At the 2025 judgment, it maintained that in 2008, the advice they acted upon was reasonable at the time, given the limitations of forensic science then available. But the Commission also affirmed its commitment to evolving with science, pledging to review older cases whenever technological advances allow. Diane's family continues to speak her name. Memorials persist near the alley where she fell. Flowers still appear on Borough Road. Local advocates recall that Diane's murder provoked fear across Merseyside. Women worried about walking home alone, and in the weeks afterward, many refused to walk the road at night. Peter Sullivan's exoneration is historic. He is reportedly now the longest-serving person ever exonerated in UK history, 38 years and counting. Wikipedia, CCRC. But the release is not relief unburdened. At age 68, Sullivan must face not only reclaiming life, but proving his innocence under civil law if he seeks compensation, a process often fraught and uncertain. His case stands as a monument of injustice, redemption, and the enduring power of scientific progress. It warns that wrongful convictions, once cemented in legal precedent, can survive decades until the quiet work of evidence, archive, and innovation unveils the truth.